A 12-year-old girl with a backpack of crayons cracked the code that 20 elite engineers couldn't. And what the CEO offered her stunned everyone. 3 days. 20 of the sharpest engineers in Chicago. And a $200 million defense contract slipping through Sterling Dynamics' fingers like sand. On the 40th floor, error codes cascaded across a wall of glowing screens, painting the boardroom in a sinister red hue. CEO Alastair Finch, steel-haired, battle-hardened, paced like a general surveying a lost war. Project Nightingale, the drone meant to secure his company's future, was grounded by forces no one could tame. Outside, the city bustled, oblivious. Inside, tension clung to the air like static. Salvation wouldn't come from Ivy League resumes or million-dollar consultants. It would come from a quiet 12-year-old girl in sneakers, clutching a backpack of crayons. What she'd draw next would rewrite aerospace history. Just before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. We love seeing how far these stories reach. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss tomorrow's special video. Now let's jump back in. Enjoy the story. In a city of steel and glass, a 12-year-old girl held the key to a nation's defense. She just didn't know it yet. What she did with that key would change everything. The air in the boardroom at Sterling Dynamics was thick with the metallic scent of fear. For 3 days, a tense silence had been the only occupant of the vast, sterile room. Outside, the city of Chicago bustled with its usual energy, the wind from Lake Michigan a cool, indifferent observer to the storm brewing on the 40th floor. At the head of a long, polished obsidian table stood Mr. Alastair Finch, the company's CEO. At 65, he was a man forged in the crucible of corporate warfare. His silver hair was impeccably styled, a stark contrast to the storm in his eyes. He wore a tailored suit of charcoal gray, a uniform for the battles he fought and won. His gaze, sharp and unforgiving, swept across the faces of his most brilliant engineers. They were the best in their field, handpicked from the most prestigious institutions, yet they sat before him like errant schoolboys. "Someone," Mr. Finch began, his voice a low growl that seemed to vibrate in the very bones of the room, "is going to tell me why our prototype is a $10 million paperweight." Now, a young, ambitious engineer named David Chun, the lead on Project Nightingale, cleared his throat. He was a prodigy, a man who had earned his doctorate in aeronautical engineering before his 30th birthday. But now, he looked like a man facing a firing squad. "Sir," David began, his voice strained, "the aerodynamics are unstable. We've run every simulation. The drone can't maintain altitude in high-velocity crosswinds. The lift-to-drag ratio is catastrophic." On a massive screen that dominated one wall of the boardroom, a 3D model of a sleek, futuristic drone was frozen in mid-flight. This was Project Nightingale, a state-of-the-art surveillance drone designed for the United States military. It was supposed to be the company's crowning achievement, the contract that would secure their legacy for a generation. Instead, the model was surrounded by a sea of red error messages, a digital testament to their failure. "Unstable is not in my vocabulary, David," Mr. Finch retorted, his voice dangerously soft. "We are 1 week from the final demonstration to the Department of Defense. 1 week from either becoming legends or a laughingstock." He began to pace, his expensive leather shoes silent on the plush carpet. Each step was a measured beat in a symphony of mounting pressure. "We have the best minds, the most advanced technology, a budget that could fund a small nation. And what we have to show for it is a drone that's afraid of a little wind." He stopped behind a junior engineer who visibly tensed. "What is the root of the problem?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. The silence that followed was a crushing weight. The engineers, these men of science and logic, had no answer. Mr. Finch let out a long, weary sigh. "I don't pay you for excuses. I pay you for solutions. Find one." He turned and walked towards the door. "You have until tomorrow morning. Fix it." The door closed with a quiet, ominous click, leaving behind the faint scent of his expensive cologne and the suffocating weight of his ultimatum. The engineers sagged in their chairs, the temporary relief of his departure quickly replaced by a fresh wave of despair. They were at a dead end, and they knew it. Miles away, in a small, immaculately clean apartment that smelled of lemon polish and freshly baked bread, Maria Sanchez was helping her daughter with her homework. At 12, Sarah had her mother's warm smile and her father's bright, curious eyes. Her blonde hair, a gift from her American father, was pulled back in a practical ponytail. She sat at the small kitchen table, a textbook on American history open before her. Maria, a woman of quiet strength and unwavering kindness, had come to America from Mexico 20 years ago. Her life had not been easy, but she had faced every challenge with a grace that was both inspiring and humbling. She was a maid at Sterling Dynamics, a job she took to provide for her daughter after her husband, a decorated war veteran, had passed away. And so, Sarah read aloud. The Wright brothers, with their understanding of aerodynamics, changed the world forever. She looked up at her mother, her eyes shining with a familiar spark of intellectual curiosity. "Mom, do you think they were scared?" Maria smiled, a gentle, reassuring expression that had been the anchor of Sarah's life. "I think they were, mija, but they were brave enough to try anyway. Just like your grandfather." Sarah's grandfather, her mother's father, was a legendary figure in their family. He had been a pilot in the Mexican Air Force, a man who could fly anything with wings and fix anything with an engine. He had taught Maria's late husband, Sarah's father, everything he knew about mechanics and engineering. His stories, passed down through the generations, were the foundation of Sarah's own fascination with flight. "Grandpa would have loved to see the drones they build at your work," Sarah said, a wistful note in her voice. Maria's smile faded slightly. She looked at the clock on the wall. It was almost time for her shift. Usually, her neighbor, a kind elderly woman named Mrs. Rodriguez, would watch Sarah. But a call an hour earlier had changed their plans. Mrs. Rodriguez had fallen and broken her hip. "Listen, mija," Maria said, her voice soft but firm. "Mrs. Rodriguez is in the hospital. I couldn't find anyone to watch you on such short notice." Sarah's brow furrowed with concern. "What are we going to do?" Maria took a deep breath. She hated what she had to do next. "You are going to have to come with me to work. We have to be very, very quiet. You can bring your books and your drawing pad. There's a small supply closet on the 38th floor that no one ever uses. You can stay there, but we have to be invisible. It's against the rules, and I could lose my job." Sarah nodded, her expression serious. "I can be invisible, Mom. I promise." Maria managed a weak smile. She felt a familiar pang of guilt. She wanted to give her daughter the world, but most days, she could barely give her a babysitter. She packed Sarah's backpack with her books, her drawing pad, and a set of colored pencils. Drawing was Sarah's passion, her way of making sense of the world. As they rode the bus to the city, Maria went over the plan again and again. They would use the service elevator. She would get Sarah settled in the supply closet before she started her rounds. A knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. If she was caught, she would be fired. No questions asked. But the thought of leaving Sarah home alone was a far greater fear. The lobby of Sterling Dynamics was a monument to corporate power. Even at night, it was an intimidating sight. Maria swiped her keycard at a side entrance, the lock beeping softly. The air inside was cool and still. "Okay, mija," she whispered. "Stealth mode." Sarah gave her a determined nod, her small hand clutching her mother's. They took the service elevator, a stark metal box that smelled of cleaning supplies. On the 38th floor, the supply closet was just as Maria remembered it. Small, windowless, and filled with shelves of cleaning products. "Here we are," she said, setting Sarah's backpack on a small stool. "You have your books, your drawings. I'll check on you every hour. Don't leave this room for any reason, okay?" "I won't, Mom. I promise." Maria looked at her daughter, so small and out of place in this massive, empty building, and her heart ached. She kissed the top of her head. "Be good, mija." She closed the door quietly and began her shift. The 40th floor, the executive level, was her last stop of the night. It was always the quietest, a ghost town of empty desks and darkened offices. As she pushed her cleaning cart down the hallway, she could hear the low, tense murmurs coming from the boardroom. The lights were still on. She sighed. It meant a long night for the engineers, and a messy room for her to clean later. She started at the far end of the hall, emptying trash cans and wiping down surfaces, her movements practiced and efficient. An hour passed, then another. The murmurs from the boardroom grew more agitated, punctuated by moments of frustrated silence. Around midnight, the door to the boardroom finally opened. The engineers filed out, their faces pale with exhaustion and defeat. They looked like a defeated army. David Chun was the last to leave, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He didn't even glance at Maria. To him, she was invisible. Maria waited a few minutes before pushing her cart toward the room. She needed to clear the trash, wipe down the table, and reset the room for the morning. As she entered, the first thing she noticed was the giant screen. The image of the drone was frozen, a single, glaring line of red error code displayed beneath it. The whiteboard next to it was a chaotic mess of equations and diagrams, lines crossed out, and question marks scribbled in the margins. She saw the discarded coffee cups, crumpled papers, and empty energy drink cans. She began to methodically clean the room, her mind a million miles away. Meanwhile, on the 38th floor, Sarah was getting restless. She had finished her homework, read a chapter of her book, and drawn a picture of a majestic eagle soaring through the clouds. She was thirsty. Her mother had told her not to leave the room, but the water fountain was just down the hall. She would be quick. No one would ever know. She quietly opened the door and peeked out. The hallway was empty and silent. The water fountain was at the far end, near the main elevators. She tiptoed down the hall, her sneakers silent on the polished floor. After getting a drink, her curiosity got the better of her. She knew her mother's last stop was the top floor. She wondered what it looked like. She pressed the elevator button. The ride up was silent and smooth. When the doors opened on the 40th floor, she stepped out into a world of deep carpets and dark wood. It was quiet, except for the soft hum of electronics. She saw a light on at the end of the hallway and a cleaning cart parked outside. Mom. She walked toward the light, wanting to surprise her. She peered into the boardroom. Her mother was there, her back to her, wiping down the long table. But it wasn't her mother that caught her eye. It was the screen. The huge screen showed a big, colorful picture of a drone that was broken. Not in pieces, but glitchy and messy. Lines of red text blinked angrily next to it. On the whiteboard beside it, there was a confusing drawing of boxes and lines and circles. It looked like a puzzle. Sarah loved puzzles. Her grandfather had taught her how to solve them, how to look at a problem from every angle, how to find the simple solution that was often hidden in plain sight. The drawing on the whiteboard looked like one of his puzzles. She could see the starting point, a box labeled fuselage, and the end point, a box labeled stable flight. But in the middle, the lines were all wrong. The wings, she thought, were the problem. They were too straight, too rigid. They were fighting the wind, not working with it. Her grandfather had always said that the secret to flight was not to conquer the wind, but to dance with it. He had shown her pictures of eagles, how their wings curved at the tips, how they used the wind to their advantage. The drone on the screen had wings like a ruler. They were designed to cut through the wind, but the wind was too strong. It was like trying to punch the ocean. The ocean always wins. She didn't think. She just acted. She saw a set of colored dry erase markers on the ledge of the whiteboard. She picked up a blue one. Her mother was still busy, humming softly as she worked. Quietly, she stepped up to the board. She drew a gentle curve at the end of the drone's wings, mimicking the shape of an eagle's wing. Then, with a red marker, she drew a big X over the straight, rigid wing design. It was so simple. The wings were fighting the wind. She had taught them how to dance. She stepped back and looked at her work. It looked much better now, more natural. The path to stable flight was clear. Suddenly, she heard a sharp gasp behind her. Maria had turned from the table and frozen in horror. She saw her daughter, her sweet, quiet Sarah, standing in the executive boardroom, holding a marker, having drawn all over the company's work. Her heart leaped into her throat. "Sarah, what did you do?" she whispered, her voice tight with panic. Sarah turned, her face falling when she saw the fear in her mother's eyes. "I was just fixing it, Mom. It was a puzzle. The wings were in the wrong place." "Oh, Mija, no. This isn't a puzzle. This is work. Very important work." She rushed to her side, grabbing an eraser. "We have to get this off before anyone sees." She started to scrub at the board, but the marker was new and the ink was strong. Her confident blue curve and the big red X remained, faint but visible, like ghosts on the white surface. A cold sweat broke out on her forehead. They were caught. She was going to lose her job. "Come on," she said, her voice trembling slightly. She grabbed her daughter's hand, left the cart, and rushed her to the service elevator. She didn't stop until they were outside, the cool night air hitting them like a slap. Her mind was racing. Maybe no one would notice. Maybe they would think one of the engineers did it. But she knew better. This was not the kind of place where things went unnoticed. High above them, in his penthouse office on the top floor, Alastair Finch stared out at the city lights, but he didn't see them. His mind was replaying the day's failures. Project Nightingale was his legacy. It was personal. He had lost his own son, a soldier, in a mission that could have been saved by a reliable surveillance drone. This project was a promise to him, a promise to all the soldiers who put their lives on the line. Defeated, he decided to take one last look. Maybe a fresh perspective would help. He rode the elevator down to the 40th floor and walked back into the silent boardroom. He looked at the chaotic whiteboard, a perfect portrait of his team's failure. And then he saw it. Amongst the frantic scrawls of his high-paid engineers, there were two new marks. A childishly drawn, but perfectly clear, blue curve, and a big, simple red X. They were not part of the original mess. They were a suggestion, a correction. His first reaction was a flash of anger. Who would dare? Who would have the audacity to graffiti the board in the middle of a crisis? But then, he looked closer. He saw the gentle curve at the end of the wing. His mind, trained to see patterns in chaos, began to work. The curve, he realized, would create a vortex of air at the wingtip, reducing drag and increasing lift. It was a principle of aerodynamics that was often overlooked in the pursuit of sleek, futuristic designs. The red X crossed out the very design flaw that was causing the instability, the one that was creating the catastrophic lift-to-drag ratio. It was impossibly simple. So simple, his team of geniuses had overlooked it entirely. They had been trying to build a brute, a machine that would conquer the wind. But the solution was to build a dancer, a machine that would partner with it. His breath caught. Could it be? He walked over to the main terminal, his heart starting to beat faster. With deft fingers, he brought up the core design file. He created a new simulation branch. He translated the simple, hand-drawn correction into code. He added the curve to the wingtips. He adjusted the angle of attack. Then he clicked run. For a tense 5 seconds, the system processed the change. And then it happened. The error messages vanished. The stability warning light on the diagnostic panel turned from a flashing red to a solid, beautiful green. On the main screen, the 3D model of the drone began to fly. It was flawless, smooth, perfect. Alastair Finch stared at the screen, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. 3 days. A team of 20 elite engineers. Millions of dollars in research and development. All of it solved by a ghost who drew on his whiteboard with a blue marker. A cold, determined look settled on his face. He wasn't just going to fix the project. He was going to find the person who had just saved it. He walked out of the room and headed directly for the security office. Pull the camera footage for the boardroom for the last hour. He commanded the night guard. I want to see everyone who went in or out of that room. The guard, startled by his presence, quickly complied. The footage appeared on the monitor. He fast-forwarded through the engineers leaving. Then he stopped. The maid, Maria Sanchez, entered with her cart. They washed her clean. And then, a small figure appeared in the doorway. A little girl with blonde hair. Alastair leaned closer to the screen, his eyes narrowed. He watched as the child walked to the whiteboard, picked up a marker, and made the correction. He watched as the maid discovered her, panicked, and rushed her out of the room. The security guard looked at Alastair, confused. It's just Sanchez's kid. She knows she's not supposed to bring her here. I can write her up, Mr. Finch. Alastair held up a hand, silencing him. He wasn't looking at the security guard. He was looking at the screen, at the image of the little girl pointing out the flaw that had stumped an entire department. Get me Maria Sanchez's employee file, he said, his voice quiet and intense. And find out where she lives. I'm paying her a visit. Tonight. The drive to Maria's apartment building was one Alastair Finch would never forget. He was used to the manicured lawns of the city's most affluent suburbs, not the cramped, narrow streets of this working-class neighborhood. His sleek, black limousine looked like a spaceship parked next to dented pickup trucks and aging family sedans. The building itself was old but clean, a brick structure that showed its age in the faint cracks running along its facade. He found apartment 3B and stood before the faded blue door for a long moment. What was he doing here? What was he possibly going to say? He was the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, about to interrogate a child about a complex aerodynamics problem. The situation was absurd. Yet, The smooth, perfectly flying drone on his boardroom screen was not. That was real. He knocked. The sound was louder than he expected in the quiet hallway. Inside, Maria had just gotten Sarah to sleep. Her own mind was a storm of worry. She had spent the last hour imagining the phone call she would receive in the morning, the cold, impersonal voice from HR telling her services were no longer required. When the knock came, she assumed it was a neighbor, perhaps complaining about a noise she hadn't realized they were making. She opened the door, and her blood ran cold. Standing in her hallway was Alistair Finch. Not in a boardroom, not behind his imposing desk, but here, on her doorstep. He was dressed in the same sharp, charcoal gray suit, looking completely out of place, and yet utterly in command. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Maria's mind went blank with shock and fear. "Mrs. Sanchez," he began, his voice even and direct. "May I come in?" It wasn't really a question. Maria, speechless, could only nod and step aside. She felt as though a king had just walked into her humble home. She gestured numbly toward her small, worn-out sofa. Alistair's eyes quickly scanned the apartment. It was small, but immaculately clean. A child's drawings were taped to the refrigerator. A stack of library books sat on the coffee table. There was a warmth here, a sense of family and love that felt a world away from his own sterile, minimalist penthouse. He chose to stand. "I believe you know why I'm here," he said, getting straight to the point. Maria's throat was dry. "Mr. Finch, I am so sorry. I know the rules. It was an emergency, my babysitter. I was going to call in, but I can't afford to lose a day's pay. I take full responsibility. It will never happen again." Alistair held up a hand. "I'm not here about the rules, Mrs. Sanchez. I'm here about the whiteboard." Maria flinched. "I tried to erase it. She didn't mean any harm. She's just a kid. She likes puzzles. Please, don't blame her. This is my fault. Fire me. But please, just leave her out of it." Alistair studied her. He saw the genuine terror in her eyes, the fierce, protective instinct of a mother. "I have no intention of firing you," he said, and a flicker of Maria's panic subsided, replaced by profound confusion. "I want you to tell me what she saw." "What she saw?" Maria stammered. "The drawing. The blue curve. The red X." She made a correction to the aerodynamic design of Project Nightingale. A correction that, I might add, my entire team of highly paid experts failed to see for 3 days. "I want to know how." Maria stared at him, dumbfounded. She had assumed Sarah had just made a mess, a random scribble. She hadn't truly looked at what she had drawn. She said the wings were in the wrong place. Her grandfather, he was a pilot. He used to tell her stories about eagles, about how they used the wind. Alistair's expression remained unreadable, but inside, his mind was racing. Eagles. The child had visualized a complex aerodynamics problem through the lens of nature. She had stripped away the layers of jargon and computer simulations and saw the raw, fundamental truth beneath. It was a form of genius he had never encountered before. "I need to speak with her," Alistair stated. "She's asleep," Maria said quickly, her protective instincts flaring up again. "She's only 12, Mr. Finch. She doesn't understand any of this." "I think she understands it better than anyone," Alistair countered softly. "This isn't a negotiation, Mrs. Sanchez. The future of my company may very well depend on a conversation with your daughter. Wake her up." His tone was firm, leaving no room for argument. Reluctantly, Maria went to Sarah's small bedroom. She gently shook her awake, her heart heavy. Sarah blinked sleepily, confused to see her mother looking so worried. "Mija, there's someone here to see you," she said quietly. "The man from my work. He wants to ask you about the drawing you made." Sarah was suddenly wide awake. "Am I in trouble?" "No, honey, you're not in trouble." She wasn't so sure about herself. She led her into the living room. Sarah stood in her unicorn pajamas, nervously clutching a stuffed rabbit, her blonde hair a messy halo around her head. She looked tiny and vulnerable standing before the imposing figure of Alistair Finch. Alistair knelt down, a surprising gesture that brought him to Sarah's eye level. His face softened almost imperceptibly. "Hello, Sarah," he said, his voice much gentler than before. "My name is Alistair. I'm not here to get you in trouble. I'm here to thank you." Sarah looked from Alistair to her mother, confused. "The drawing you made on my whiteboard tonight," Alistair continued. "Can you tell me what you saw?" Sarah's nervousness began to fade. replaced by the earnest desire to explain her logic. It was the wings, she said, her voice small but clear. They were too straight. They were fighting the wind. Eagles, their wings are curved. They dance with the wind. Alistair listened, fascinated. Sarah wasn't using technical terms, but her description was perfectly accurate. She was describing the principles of wingtip vortices and induced drag. So, Alistair prompted, what did you do? I made the wings dance, Sarah said simply. I gave them a little curve. Now they can fly with the wind, not against it. She looked up at Alistair, her blue eyes wide and serious. It's more efficient that way. Efficient. A 12-year-old in unicorn pajamas had just used the word efficient to describe a solution to a $100 million problem. Alistair Finch felt a slow smile spread across his face. It was a rare sight, one that most of his employees had never witnessed. Yes, Sarah, he said. It is. He stood up and looked at Maria, who had been watching the entire exchange with a mixture of pride and utter disbelief. Mrs. Sanchez, he said, his tone all business once more. Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. I'm calling a full project meeting. I want you both there. Maria's jaw dropped. Us? In a project meeting? Mr. Finch, I'm a maid. She's a child. What could we possibly do? Your daughter just did what 20 engineers could not. She gave us the solution. Now I need her to explain it to them. And you will be there with her. He pulled a business card from his suit pocket. My personal number. A car will be sent to pick you up at 9. Don't be late. And with that, he turned and walked out, leaving the door open behind him. Maria and Sarah stood in the stunned silence, the cool night air drifting into their small apartment. Maria looked from the business card in her hand to her daughter, who was now sleepily rubbing her eyes, unaware that she had just turned their entire world upside down. The next morning, the atmosphere in the boardroom at Sterling Dynamics was thick with tension and confusion. Alistair had called the emergency meeting with a cryptic message. A solution has been found. Attendance is mandatory. The engineers were gathered, whispering amongst themselves. David Chun was holding court, looking smug. He's bluffing, he said to a colleague. Trying to light a fire under us. There's no way anyone solved it overnight. We would have detected it. The door opened. They all straightened up, expecting to see Alistair. Instead, Maria Sanchez, their maid, walked in. She was wearing her best dress, a simple but elegant floral print. Holding her hand was her daughter, Sarah, in a neat blue dress, her blonde hair neatly braided. She clutched her stuffed rabbit. A wave of bewildered silence washed over the room. The engineers exchanged confused, and in some cases, scornful, glances. What was the maid doing here with her kid? David Chin actually let out a short, disbelieving laugh. Is this some kind of joke? Before Maria could respond, Alistair Finch entered behind them. His presence immediately silenced the room. Good morning, he said, his voice crisp. Please, take a seat. He gestured to 2 empty chairs right next to him at the head of the table. Maria hesitated, but a firm look from Alistair urged her forward. She and Sarah sat down, the engineers staring at them as if they were aliens who had just landed. Sarah's small feet didn't even touch the floor. As I mentioned, Alistair began, a solution to our aerodynamics problem has been found. The patch was implemented last night. The system is stable and running at 100% efficiency. A low murmur of disbelief went through the room. David's smug expression faltered. Who, he asked. Who fixed it? Was it the consulting team from MIT? Alistair's gaze was like ice. No, David. It wasn't. He looked down the table, his eyes landing on each and every one of them. The person who identified the flaw that has held this company hostage for the past 3 days is sitting in this room. Every head turned, looking for a new face, an unfamiliar expert who might have been flown in overnight. Alistair allowed the silence to stretch for a moment before he placed a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder. This is Sarah Sanchez, he announced. And she is the one who solved your problem. The silence that followed was no longer just confused. It was absolute, deafening shock. Jaws hung open. People stared, first at the little girl, then at Alistair, as if trying to determine if he had lost his mind. David Chun was the first to recover. He looked at Alistair, his face a mask of incredulity and professional outrage. With all due respect, Mr. Finch, you cannot be serious, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. You're telling us that this child fixed a multi-layered, quantum state aerodynamic problem? That is impossible. It must have been a fluke. A coincidental system reset. It was not a fluke, Alistair said calmly. He tapped a button on the console in front of him. The main screen lit up, showing the whiteboard from the previous night. A photo of Sarah's drawing, the simple blue curve and the red X, was displayed for all to see. This, Alistair said, his voice ringing with authority, is the solution. Elegant, simple, and correct. Something all of you, with your advanced degrees and years of experience, completely missed. You were all looking at the problem from the inside out. Sarah saw it from the outside in. She saw the pattern, not the code. He turned to Sarah. Sarah, would you be willing to explain to these gentlemen what you told me last night? About the eagle's wings. All eyes fell on the little girl. Sarah shrank back in her seat, intimidated by the intense stares of so many adults. She looked at her mother, who gave her a small, encouraging nod. She was terrified, but she would not let her daughter face this alone. Sarah took a shaky breath and spoke, her voice just above a whisper, but clear in the silent room. The drone, it was fighting the wind, she began. It was like trying to swim against a strong current. You get tired and you don't go anywhere. I just taught it how to use the current. She looked at David Chun, her expression one of pure, innocent logic. You have to work with the wind, not against it. It's a dance. David stared at her, his face flushing with a mixture of anger and humiliation. To be lectured on the principles of aerodynamics by a child was the ultimate insult. This is a circus, he muttered, shaking his head. The only circus here, David, Alistair cut in, his voice like steel, is the one that has been running for the past 3 days, costing this company millions of dollars and jeopardizing its future. Sarah Sanchez has done more for Sterling Dynamics in 5 minutes with a marker than your entire team has in 72 hours. He stood up, his authority absolute. For the next week, Sarah will be acting as a special consultant on Project Nightingale. A collective gasp went through the room. She and her mother will be given full access. I expect every single one of you to treat her with the respect she has earned. You will listen to her. You will answer her questions. And perhaps, if you're smart, you will learn something from her. Am I understood? No one dared to speak. The message was clear. The maid's daughter was, for the moment, the most important person in the room. Maria sat frozen in her chair, her mind reeling. An hour ago, she was worried about being fired. Now, her daughter was a consultant, and she was her handler. She looked at Sarah, who was looking down at her stuffed rabbit, seemingly unaware of the revolution she had just started. A new chapter had just begun, and for the first time in a long time, Maria Sanchez had no idea what was going to happen next. The week that followed was one of the strangest in the history of Sterling Dynamics. It began with Maria and Sarah arriving not through the service entrance, but through the main lobby. The same security guard who had watched them on the monitor the night before now tipped his hat to them. A car, a sleek black sedan that smelled of new leather, had picked them up, just as Mr. Finch had promised. It was a small thing, but it was a clear signal to everyone who was paying attention. The world had tilted on its axis. Their new base of operations was a small and used office adjacent to the main boardroom. It had a large window with a breathtaking view of the city and Lake Michigan. Mr. Finch had ordered a comfortable chair for Maria and a desk for Sarah, complete with a brand new set of colored pencils and a stack of drawing paper. He had also assigned them a personal assistant, a kind, efficient young woman named Clara, who was tasked with getting them anything they needed. Coffee for Maria, juice boxes for Sarah. On that first morning, the engineers filed into the boardroom for their daily briefing, their mood a mixture of resentment and morbid curiosity. They found Sarah already there, sitting at the head of the table next to Mr. Finch. She wasn't looking at the complex schematics on the main screen. Instead, she was drawing on her pad. She was drawing a bird. David Chun, who had stewed in a pot of bitter humiliation all night, couldn't contain his sarcasm. Are we waiting for the art lesson to conclude before we get back to saving this $10 million project? He asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. Alistair Finch's gaze snapped toward him, cold and sharp. You had your chance to save it, David. For now, you will listen. Sarah, please, show them what you were just showing me. Sarah, who had grown a little more confident in Alistair's presence, held up her drawing. It was a simple sketch of a pigeon. Pigeons aren't as graceful as eagles, she explained, her voice quiet but carrying in the silent room. Their wings are shorter. They have to flap more. They're built for quick takeoffs in the city, not for soaring. She picked up another piece of paper. This one had a rough sketch of the Nightingale drone. Your drone is like a pigeon trying to be an eagle, she said. The wings are eagle wings now, but the body is still a pigeon. It's too heavy in the back. Alistair translated. She's pointing out a weight distribution issue. The modifications we made to the wing design have shifted the center of gravity. The fuselage is now imbalanced. He looked at his team. Did anyone think to rerun the balance diagnostics after the patch was implemented? Silence. They had been so focused on the single problem of the wings that they had failed to consider the ripple effects of the solution. They had been looking at the pieces, not the whole. Sarah noticed it. Alistair continued. Because she wasn't looking at your equations. She was looking at the way the drone moved in the simulation. She said it wobbled. He looked at Sarah. What was the word you used? It wiggled its butt, Sarah said, a small giggle escaping her lips. A few of the younger engineers couldn't help but smile. David Chun, however, looked as if he had just been forced to swallow acid. But wiggling is not a recognized principle of aeronautical engineering, he sneered. No. Alistair agreed, a dangerous glint in his eye. But it is a very effective way of describing a fuselage oscillation caused by a rearward shift in the center of gravity. Fix it. And so it went, day after day. Sarah would watch the simulations, not with the eye of an engineer, but with the eye of a naturalist. She didn't see code. She saw movement. She didn't see data. She saw behavior. She would describe complex problems in the simple language of a child, using analogies from the natural world that her grandfather had taught her about. When the drone's landing gear was deploying too slowly, she said it was like a sleepy turtle sticking its head out of its shell. This led the engineers to discover a hydraulic pressure issue that their diagnostics had missed. When the drone's camera was having trouble focusing, she said it was like when you try to look at something up close and your eyes go all fuzzy. This prompted them to recalibrate the lens's microservos, solving a problem that had plagued them for weeks. Maria watched it all from her corner of the room, her heart a whirlwind of emotions. She was terrified, proud, and completely out of her depth. She sat in on meetings about things she didn't understand, drinking coffee from a fine china cup, while men with PhDs listened to her daughter talk about sleepy turtles. It was a surreal dream from which she was afraid she would wake up at any moment. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the attitude in the room began to change. The initial resentment and scorn began to curdle into a grudging respect. The younger engineers, less set in their ways, were the first to come around. They started to see that Sarah's perspective, her outside-in thinking, was not a joke. It was a tool, a new way of looking at old problems. They started to seek her out, showing her their simulations and asking, "Okay, Sarah, what animal does this look like to you?" David Chun, however, remained stubbornly resistant. He saw Sarah not as a prodigy, but as a threat. She was an affront to his education, his experience, and his ego. He saw her simple solutions as a mockery of his complex failures. He began to work behind the scenes, trying to find a flaw in her logic, a mistake that would expose her as a fraud and restore his own tarnished reputation. He was a man drowning in a sea of his own pride, and he was determined to pull everyone down with him. Alistair Finch was aware of the shifting dynamics. He saw the way David's resentment was festering, and he saw the way the rest of the team was starting to rally around Sarah. He found himself spending more and more time with the young girl and her mother. He would join them for lunch in the executive dining room, a place Maria had only ever cleaned. He learned about her late husband, the decorated veteran, and about her father, the pilot from Mexico. He began to understand where Sarah's unique gift came from. It was a legacy, a blend of a soldier's pragmatism and a pilot's intuition. One afternoon, as they were looking out the window of their temporary office, Alistair asked Sarah a question that had been on his mind. "Sarah, you know so much about how things fly. What do you want to be when you grow up?" Sarah didn't hesitate. "I want to build things," she said, her eyes shining. "Things that help people. Like my dad." Alistair looked at Maria, a new level of respect dawning in his eyes. This child wasn't just a fluke. She was the product of a strong, loving family, a legacy of service and ingenuity. And he, Alistair Finch, the man who had everything, realized he had stumbled upon something more valuable than any government contract. He had found a future. The day of the final demonstration to the Department of Defense arrived. It was a gray, overcast morning, the kind that promised rain but never delivered. A delegation of high-ranking military officials, led by a stern, four-star general named Marcus Thorne, had gathered in a specially prepared viewing room. The mood was electric with anticipation. The future of Sterling Dynamics, and a significant piece of America's military strategy, hinged on the next hour. Project Nightingale was on a remote airfield, ready for its final test. The engineers were in the control room, a tense hive of activity. Sarah and Maria were in the viewing room with Alistair and the military delegation. Sarah had a small pair of binoculars, her eyes glued to the large screen showing a live feed from the airfield. David Chun, as the lead engineer, was narrating the test. His voice was smooth and professional, betraying none of the turmoil that had been brewing within him. He guided the drone through its pre-flight checks. Everything was perfect. Commencing vertical takeoff, he announced. The drone lifted off the ground, its movements smooth and controlled. It ascended to its target altitude, the engines humming a quiet, confident tune. It performed a series of complex aerial maneuvers, flawlessly executing every command. The military officials murmured their approval. General Thorne nodded, a rare sign of satisfaction. Alistair allowed himself a small, internal sigh of relief. It was working. The girl had done it. Then, David announced the final and most critical part of the test. We will now demonstrate the drone's stability in extreme crosswind conditions. We will be simulating a Category 3 hurricane force wind. On the screen, a massive wind turbine at the edge of the airfield began to spin, generating a powerful, targeted gust of wind. This was the test that had caused the catastrophic failure just 1 week ago. The drone met the wall of wind. For a heart-stopping second, it dipped. Sarah, watching through her binoculars, gasped. "It's wiggling its butt again," she whispered, her voice tight with alarm. Alistair's head snapped toward her. "What?" On the screen, the drone was indeed oscillating, the tail section swaying back and forth in a way it had not done in any of the recent simulations. A red warning light began to flash on the control panel. "What's happening, David?" Alistair's voice boomed through the intercom connecting the viewing room to the control room. "It's a minor turbulence reaction, sir." David's voice came back, a little too quickly. "The system is compensating." But the oscillation was getting worse. The drone was fighting to maintain its altitude, its movements becoming erratic. The military officials were no longer looking impressed. They were looking concerned. General Thorne's face was a thundercloud. "It's the tail," Sarah said, her voice more urgent now. "He did something to the tail." Maria put a protective arm around her daughter, her heart pounding. What was happening? Alistair's mind raced. He looked at the screen, then at Sarah. And then he understood. The pride. The resentment. David Chun had been humiliated, and a man like that does not go down without a fight. "David," Alistair's voice was dangerously calm. "Did you make any unauthorized modifications to the flight control software?" A moment of static-filled silence. Then, "No, sir. I've been following the new parameters exactly." It was a lie. Alistair knew it. Sarah knew it. And in that moment, Alistair Finch had to make a choice. Trust the lead engineer with a PhD from MIT, or trust the 12-year-old girl in the blue dress. It wasn't a choice at all. He pressed a button on his console, overriding David's control. A new icon, a small, hand-drawn eagle, appeared on the main screen. It was a fail-safe program, one that Sarah and a few of the younger, more loyal engineers had developed in secret over the past few days. They called it the Eagle Protocol. It was a simplified, back-to-basics version of the flight control system, based entirely on Sarah's observations about natural flight. It was untested. It was a wild, desperate gamble. Engaging the Eagle Protocol, Alistair announced, his voice ringing with a finality that sent a chill through the room. In the control room, David Chin's face went white. He tried to override the command, but he was locked out. The system was no longer his. On the screen, the drone stopped fighting the wind. For a terrifying moment, it seemed to fall. A collective gasp went through the viewing room. Then, something miraculous happened. The drone tilted its wings, not against the wind, but with it. It caught the current, using the immense force of the wind to lift it higher. It began to soar, dancing with the hurricane force gust, moving with a grace and stability that was breathtaking to behold. It was no longer a machine fighting a storm. It was an eagle riding the wind. The room was silent, the only sound the soft hum of the servers. Everyone, from the engineers to the four-star general, stared at the screen, transfixed. They had just witnessed the impossible. General Thorne turned to Alistair, his stern expression replaced by one of pure, unadulterated awe. "Mr. Finch," he said, his voice a low rumble of astonishment. "What in God's name did I just see?" Alistair looked down at Sarah, who was watching the screen with a look of quiet satisfaction. He placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of profound respect. "General," he said, a slow, triumphant smile spreading across his face. "You just saw the future." The silence in the viewing room was broken by a slow, deliberate clap. It was General Thorne. He rose to his feet, his eyes still fixed on the screen where the Nightingale drone was now performing a perfect, stable holding pattern against the manufactured wind. One by one, the other military officials stood and joined the applause. It was not the polite, obligatory applause of a boardroom. It was a genuine, thunderous ovation. Alistair Finch felt a wave of relief so profound it almost buckled his knees. He had not just saved the contract. He had redefined what his company was capable of. He looked at Maria, who had tears streaming down her face, a silent testament to the fear and pride that had been at war within her for the past hour. General Thorne walked over to Alistair, his hand outstretched. "Finch," he said, his voice a low, respectful baritone. "I've been in this business for 40 years. I've seen prototypes that were brilliant and prototypes that were disasters. I have never, ever seen anything like that. The Eagle Protocol, it's not just a piece of software. It's a paradigm shift." "Thank you, General," Alistair said, shaking his hand firmly. The general's gaze then moved past Alistair and settled on Sarah, who was still standing quietly by the console, her small hand clutching her mother's. "That was your doing, wasn't it, young lady?" Sarah looked up at the towering, uniformed man and nodded shyly. "I'd like to meet the mind behind the miracle," the general said, his stern features softening into something resembling a grandfatherly smile. He knelt down, just as Alistair had done in the small apartment, bringing himself to her level. "What's your name, soldier?" "Sarah Sanchez, sir," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. "Well, Sarah Sanchez," the general said, "you have a gift. A way of seeing things that most people lose when they grow up. You remind me of some of the best mechanics I ever served with. Men who could listen to an engine and know exactly what was wrong, not because a book told them, but because they understood the machine. It's in their blood." He glanced at Maria. "Her father was a military man, I take it?" Maria's eyes widened in surprise. "Yes, sir. My husband. He was in the army. He served 2 tours. The general nodded slowly, a look of deep understanding on his face. "I thought so. It's a legacy. He would be very proud of you today, Sarah." He stood up and gave Alistair a firm, meaningful look. "You make sure you take care of this one, Finch. She's a national asset." With that, the delegation began to file out, their excited chatter about contracts and deployment schedules filling the hallway. The crisis was over. The victory was won. But for Alistair Finch, the day's work was not yet finished. He had one last piece of business to attend to. "Clara," he said to his assistant, "please take Mrs. Sanchez and Sarah to my office. Order them whatever they'd like for lunch. I'll be there shortly." He then turned his attention to the intercom. His voice, when he spoke again, had lost all its warmth. It was the sound of impending judgment. "David, my office." Now, the walk from the control room to the 40th floor was the longest of David Chen's life. He was escorted by security, a final, public humiliation. When he entered Alistair Finch's office, the CEO was standing by the large window, his back to the door, looking out at the city. "You have one opportunity to tell me why I shouldn't have you arrested for industrial sabotage," Alistair said without turning around. David's arrogance had finally shattered, replaced by a desperate, panicked fear. "It wasn't sabotage, sir, I swear," he stammered. "It was a diagnostic override. I thought I saw a flaw in the child's protocol. A potential feedback loop. I was trying to correct it in real time. I was trying to protect the project." Alistair turned around slowly, his face a mask of cold fury. "A flaw in her protocol? The one that is currently performing flawlessly and just secured this company the largest contract in its history? You felt the need to correct the work of the one person who had been right about everything. after you and your team had been wrong for months. He walked toward his desk and picked up a single sheet of paper. It was a printout of the system logs. The logs show that you didn't add a correction, David. You introduced a deliberate instability into the tail rotor's firmware. A minor one, you thought. Just enough to make her solution look flawed. Just enough to make you look like the hero who had to swoop in and save the day. David's face went pale. He had been so sure his tracks were covered. Your problem, Alistair continued, his voice dangerously low, is not that you're a bad engineer. Your problem is that you're an arrogant one. Your pride was so wounded by the fact that a 12-year-old girl could see what you could not that you were willing to risk the entire company just to soothe your own ego. He tossed the log sheet onto his desk. You are fired, of course. Your security clearance is revoked. You will be escorted from the building, and you will never work in this industry again. I will see to it personally. David opened his mouth to protest, to beg, but Alistair held up a hand. But that's not your real punishment, David. Your real punishment is that for the rest of your life, you will have to live with the knowledge that you were outsmarted by a little girl with a drawing of an eagle. You will see her name in the news someday. You will see the things she goes on to create. And you will know that you had the chance to learn from her, and you chose to be a fool instead. Now get out of my sight. Security guards gently but firmly took David by the arms and led him away, a broken man. Alistair watched him go, then took a deep, steadying breath. The unpleasant part was over. Now came the part he had been looking forward to. He walked into the adjoining private conference room. Sarah was happily eating a cheeseburger and fries, while Maria was nervously picking at a salad. They both looked up as he entered. First, he said, a genuine smile returning to his face, I want to say thank you, both of you. Maria, for your courage and integrity, and Sarah, for your genius. Maria blushed. Mr. Finch, we were just... You were everything, he interrupted gently. He sat down opposite them. After my conversation with General Thorne, I've been doing some thinking about the future, not just of the drone, but of this company. For years, we've been hiring the same kind of people, the best graduates from the best schools. We've filled this building with brilliant minds, but they are all brilliant in the same way. Today, Sarah reminded me that the most revolutionary ideas often come from the most unexpected places. He leaned forward, his expression earnest and intense. This is what I would like to offer you. It is not a reward. It is an investment in the future of Sterling Dynamics. He slid a thick folder across the table toward Maria. Effective immediately, I am creating a new division. It will be called the Sanchez Initiative. Its purpose will be to approach our most difficult engineering problems from a non-traditional perspective, to look for the eagle's wings solution in everything we do. Maria stared at him, her fork frozen halfway to her mouth. Sarah, he continued, turning to the little girl, I want you to be the founding member and guiding spirit of this initiative. Obviously, you have to finish school. So, Sterling Dynamics will be providing you with a full scholarship to any school, any college, any university in the world you choose to attend, all the way through your PhD, should you choose to pursue one. During that time, we will pay you a consultant salary to spend your summers here, leading a team that we will build around your unique way of thinking. Sarah's eyes were as wide as saucers. She looked at her mother, who was utterly speechless. And Maria, Alistair said, his voice softening, I know that your daughter is the most important thing in the world to you. Her gift needs to be nurtured, and she needs her mother by her side. A maid's salary is not enough for the mother of my company's most valuable asset. The folder in front of you contains a contract for the position of Administrative Director of the Sanchez Initiative. You will manage its budget, its personnel, and its logistics. You are organized, you are responsible, and you have more integrity than anyone I have ever met. The salary is non-negotiable. With a trembling hand, Maria opened the folder. She looked at the number at the bottom of the contract, and a sharp, audible gasp escaped her lips. It was more money than she had ever dreamed of seeing. It was more than her husband had made in his entire military career. It was enough to buy a house. Enough to never have to worry about a broken-down car or a sudden medical bill ever again. It was a new life. Tears welled up in her eyes again. But this time, they were not tears of fear or relief. They were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. She looked across the table at the powerful CEO, the man who, just 24 hours ago, she had been terrified would fire her. Mr. Finch, I don't know what to say, she stammered, her voice thick with emotion. Say you'll accept, he said simply. Say you'll help me build a better company. Maria looked at her daughter. Sarah was no longer the sleepy child in unicorn pajamas. She was sitting tall, a look of quiet determination on her face. She was ready. Maria took a deep breath, the weight of a lifetime of struggle finally lifting from her shoulders. She looked at Alastair Finch, no longer as a maid to a CEO, but as a partner. We accept, she said. 3 months later, on a bright, sunny afternoon, Maria Sanchez drove her new, reliable car up to the gates of a cemetery. She got out with Sarah, and together they walked to a simple, dignified headstone that read, Sergeant James Sanchez. A soldier, a husband, a father, a hero. The grass was green, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of a nearby oak tree. Maria placed a small bouquet of fresh flowers at the base of the stone. Hi, honey, she whispered. We have some news. Sarah stepped forward, holding a small, sleek object in her hands. It was a miniature, perfectly crafted model of the Nightingale drone. She had designed it herself, and the company's model shop had built it for her. She gently placed it next to the flowers. Hi, Dad, she said, her voice clear and strong. I built something to help people, like you did. I wish you could see it. I think you'd be proud. They stood there for a long time, mother and daughter, the setting sun casting long shadows across the grass. The world had not changed. It was still a place of struggle and hardship. But for them, everything had changed. Their future was no longer a question of survival, but a horizon of infinite possibility. Alastair Finch had been right. It was a legacy of service, of quiet strength, and of the courage to look at the sky and see not the storm, but the eagle dancing on the wind. And for Sarah Sanchez, this was only the beginning of her flight. Thank you for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and share your thoughts below. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Stay tuned for more immersive stories.